Today, we're digging into a topic that seems straightforward at first glance, but is actually a deeply profound story about the brain, survival, and a really tragic paradox. We're talking about the connection between schizophrenia and smoking. And we're going to explore a radical idea. What if, for some people, it's not really about addiction at all, but about a desperate, unconscious act of self-medication? Okay, let's get into it.
First up, let's just start with this one staggering number. Nearly 70% of people with schizophrenia smoke. To put that in perspective, that's 2 to 3 times higher than the general population. This isn't just a small statistical quirk, it's a massive, consistent pattern that has left researchers scratching their heads for decades. What is going on with this specific group?
Now, the easy answer, the one a lot of people jump to, is to just write it off as a bad habit, right? Maybe a lack of impulse control. But the science, well, the science is pointing to something way deeper and a whole lot more complex. The latest research is telling us this might not be about choice in the way we usually think about it. The real answer, it seems, is buried deep in the brain's fundamental biology.
And this brings us to the core of the issue, a paradox, a tug-of-war happening inside the brain that new imaging studies are finally letting us see. It turns out that for someone with schizophrenia, smoking has 2 completely contradictory effects. It both harms and helps at the exact same time.
Yeah, check this out. It's a total contradiction. On one hand, MRI scans show pretty clearly that smoking speeds up the loss of gray matter. That's the brain tissue you need for thinking, memory, and emotions. But then, on the other hand, those exact same scans suggest smoking actually improves the communication between different parts of the brain that often don't talk to each other very well in schizophrenia. So, how can it do both?
Okay, so let's look at the damage first. It's no secret that both schizophrenia and smoking, on their own, can lead to gray matter loss. But when you put them together, it's like a 1-2 punch. The effect gets even worse. And we're not talking about just any part of the brain. This is happening in critical areas like the prefrontal cortex, your brain's CEO, the amygdala, which handles emotion, and the hippocampus for memory. That's the clear, undisputed harm. But then there's this other, frankly bizarre side of the coin. Other studies looking at brain function show that in smokers with schizophrenia, key brain networks actually start talking to each other more. It's like nicotine acts as a temporary patch, improving the connection on these neural highways that are usually full of static. So even while the physical hardware is degrading, the software's performance gets a temporary boost. Wild, right?
So that leads to the million-dollar question. Why? Why would a neurotoxin, something we know is bad for the brain, have this seemingly helpful effect? Well, to figure that out, we have to stop looking at the big picture of brain networks and zoom way, way down, all the way to the molecular level, to find the real root cause.
And a huge piece of this puzzle is a condition called hypofrontality. It's a classic feature of schizophrenia. Basically, it means there's constantly low-level activity in the prefrontal cortex. Think of it like the brain's main control center is always running on low battery. And that directly causes problems with focus, working memory, and just organizing your thoughts.
And this is where the nicotine from a cigarette comes in. It acts like a chemical key. It slips into the brain and unlocks a flood of neurotransmitters that give that sluggish prefrontal cortex a powerful jolt. All of a sudden, the control center is back online. I mean, this is the very definition of self-medication, using a substance to fix an underlying biological problem.
But wait, there's another reason, and this one might be even more important. See, most of our brains have this amazing ability called sensory gating. It's like a built-in filter that automatically blocks out repetitive, useless background noise, like the hum of your computer or the clock ticking, so you can actually focus on what matters. Now just imagine for a second that your filter is broken. Every little sound, every flicker of light, every sensation comes flooding into your brain with the same high-alert intensity. The world would feel like a chaotic, overwhelming storm of information. For many people with schizophrenia, that's their daily reality. And what the research shows is that nicotine can almost instantly help patch up that broken filter. It creates a moment of quiet in an incredibly loud internal world.
So, when you put it all together, clearing the cognitive fog and quieting that sensory storm, the act of smoking completely transforms. It stops looking like a bad habit and starts looking a lot more like a survival tool. It's an unconscious biological drive to manage a brain that's struggling to process the world around it.
And this model here really gets to the heart of why nicotine can have such a massive effect. It all comes down to these tiny little docking stations in the brain called nicotinic acetylcholine receptors. In schizophrenia, there are underlying issues with these very receptors.
So when the nicotine from a cigarette rushes in, it's interacting directly with this faulty system, which leads to all those paradoxical effects we were talking about.
And we can get even more specific. The science traces the problem to one particular type of receptor, the alpha-7 NACHR. Because of a genetic link, many people with schizophrenia either have fewer of these receptors, or the ones they do have just don't work right. They're tuned down. So it takes a massive dose of nicotine, the kind of powerful, rapid-fire flood you only get from inhaling cigarette smoke, to force these faulty receptors to wake up and do their job.
So when you line up all the evidence, the conclusion is pretty startling, and it changes everything. For a person whose brain is fighting a constant battle against sensory overload and cognitive fog, lighting up a cigarette isn't about chasing a feeling of pleasure. It's an unconscious biological drive to feel normal, to think clearly, to quiet the noise. It is, in essence, a form of self-treatment.
Realizing this completely reframes the whole issue, but it doesn't make it simpler. In fact, it leads us to an incredibly difficult, tragic dilemma. It creates an almost impossible situation for patients, for their families, and for the doctors trying to help them.
One of the sources for this explainer put the choice in these stark, powerful terms: risking lung cancer for mental clarity. Just let that sink in for a second. It perfectly captures the tragedy of the situation. It's a choice that absolutely no one should ever have to make. Do you sacrifice your long-term physical health just to get a few moments of mental peace?
And that dilemma puts doctors in a terrible spot. I mean, what's the right call? If you push your patient to quit, you might be taking away the only tool they have to manage their symptoms, potentially causing a severe cognitive decline. But if you let them keep smoking, you're essentially co-signing on the devastating long-term health risks. There's just no easy answer.
So we're left with this question, which really gets to the heart of it all. This research doesn't excuse smoking, but it does explain it with a level of empathy that's often missing. It shifts our perspective from judgment to a deep, biological understanding. And it highlights the urgent, desperate need for new treatments, therapies that can give the brain the help it needs without the deadly delivery system of a cigarette. When the poison is also the medicine, it forces us to rethink everything we thought we knew about addiction, choice, and what it really means to help.